Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're here today because we're jumping right into a massive, fundamental shift happening right now in the business world. We're going to unpack exactly how we need to lead in a rapidly changing, highly digital environment. Because let's face it, if you want to build an adaptable, resilient team that actually thrives on innovation, you are in exactly the right place. So, I want to kick things off by asking you to reflect on a pretty provocative question. Is your leadership style already obsolete? The reality is, things like digital transformation, automation, and AI have radically compressed industry cycles. If you're still relying on a traditional management approach that was optimized for the industrial era, well, it might actually be the exact thing holding you and your team back. Okay, here's our game plan. We're going to cover the death of command and control, define the four I's of leadership, explore startup safety, look at some real-world titans, examine the dark side of all this, and finally, figure out how you can lead like a visionary. Let's dive right into the death of command and control and why the status quo is fundamentally failing us. You know, the corporate landscape is literally shifting under our feet, and those old, rigid hierarchies, they just aren't cutting it anymore. There is a stark contrast between the outdated past and the agile future we absolutely need. Transactional management is your classic top-down command and control framework. It relies heavily on extrinsic rewards, the old carrot and stick method. It's built on rigid hierarchies and centralized decisions that focus entirely on short-term cost efficiency. But then you have transformational leadership. This relies on intrinsic values, collaborative networks, decentralized input from your team, and long-term capability growth. In today's knowledge-based economy, those old, rigid transactional structures are actually massive barriers to survival. And relying on that top-down oversight, it completely stifles employee creativity, which ultimately leads to corporate stagnation. And this stagnation usually shows up in three really destructive forms of organizational inertia. First, there's insight inertia. This is a total, almost willful inability to even recognize that change is needed in the first place. Second is psychological inertia. This is a super powerful cognitive bias where a team just constantly reverts back to the status quo simply because it's comfortable. And third, action inertia. This is a delayed or sometimes completely paralyzed response to necessary strategic moves. To beat this kind of inertia, we literally have to transition to a transformational model. So, what does that model actually look like? Let's unpack the theoretical architecture of transformational leadership, focusing on the four I's. Back in 1985, Bernard Bass expanded on this modern construct of transformational leadership. He identified that to be truly effective, leadership has to alter the motivational baseline of both the leader and the follower. He broke this down into four core behavioral dimensions, famously known as the four I's. These four elements shift a leader's focus away from just a simple exchange of rewards and towards higher-order developmental needs. Let's break each one of these down. The first I is idealized influence. Think of this as being the role model. This is all about serving as an ethical and professional standard for your team. It means demonstrating incredibly high moral standards, consistency, and highly transparent decision-making. When you model ethical conduct and prioritize the collective welfare of your team, you build a cohesive culture that's deeply rooted in fairness and authenticity. Your team is naturally going to trust you because your actions perfectly align with your words. Next up, we've got inspirational motivation. This is where you become the visionary. It involves articulating an optimistic, crystal clear, and compelling strategic vision. It's about taking your team's daily, mundane tasks and giving them a much deeper significance. By using authentic communication and storytelling, you can successfully align individual aspirations with the broader, big-picture objectives of the organization. You're basically transforming a basic corporate objective into a shared, passionate mission. Our third I is intellectual stimulation, which makes you the innovator. Transformational leaders actively encourage creativity, they challenge long-held assumptions, and they welcome diverse viewpoints without any fear of failure hanging over the team's head. And this is absolutely crucial. This is exactly how you normalize risk-taking and accelerate continuous operational agility. If you want your team to stop hiding their mistakes and start actually solving problems, intellectual stimulation is how you get there. Finally, there's individualized consideration. This is where you step into the role of the mentor. This dimension is entirely focused on empathy. It's about providing one-on-one coaching and personalized mentorship to help every single employee grow. By offering this customized development and, frankly, just actively listening to their concerns and goals, you foster an incredibly strong talent pipeline and deep loyalty. You aren't just managing your people, you're actively developing them.
Now let's take these concepts and drop them into a seriously high-stakes environment: startups and psychological safety. Startups operate with insanely constrained resources and really complex market dynamics. This makes leadership literally a make or break factor. Recent studies actually highlight that a founder's personality traits, specifically things like openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, paired with transformational behaviors, directly impact a startup's entire trajectory. What a founder is really doing when they use the 4 I's is cultivating psychological safety. This creates an environment where employees feel perfectly safe to voice their concerns, experiment, and learn from their failures without worrying about negative consequences. In the startup world, that kind of safety is the very engine of innovation.
All right, theory is great, but let's see what this looks like in practice with some real-world transformational titans. Take Satya Nadella, for example. When he became CEO of Microsoft, he stated his main goal was to shift the company's culture from a know-it-all to a learn-it-all mindset. He perfectly embodied the eye of intellectual stimulation. By promoting relentless curiosity, inclusivity, and genuine innovation, he encouraged his employees to experiment and collaborate like never before. That single, massive shift in leadership style revitalized Microsoft's entire identity and successfully repositioned it as the global titan it is today. And then, of course, there's Steve Jobs upon his famous return to Apple in 1997. He demonstrated masterful, inspirational motivation. He rallied his team around a bold, almost seemingly impossible vision of innovation and design excellence. He didn't just hand out tasks. He gave his people a shared mission to literally change the world through consumer electronics. And in doing so, he transformed a struggling computer company into one of the most valuable brands in human history. But listen, we have to talk about the risks. Let's look at the dark side of this framework and recognize the pitfalls. Because here's the thing, while these real-world results are incredible, this framework is absolutely not a flawless magic bullet. We must responsibly acknowledge the risks and learn to distinguish between what is authentic and what is totally fake. Authentic transformational leadership relies on genuine empathy, ethical alignment, and holistic care for the workforce's well-being. But you've got to watch out for pseudo-transformational leadership. This is when a leader weaponizes charisma and a grand vision for manipulative, totally self-serving motives. Their vision is entirely uncoupled from actual employee welfare, which leads to highly toxic environments where the leader's ego completely supersedes the team's health.
And even with the best intentions, there are real side effects here. Those relentlessly high expectations, they can easily cause severe employee burnout. Teams can also become completely overdependent on a highly charismatic leader, eventually losing their own independent decision-making abilities. And importantly, if a leader focuses heavily on the grand vision but completely lacks individualized consideration, it causes massive operational fractures. The source material actually points to Amazon's earlier fulfillment center models as a perfect example of this. Their white-collar divisions had high autonomy and intellectual simulation, but warehouse operations were so metric-heavy, with public reports of intense physical strain. That shows a stark deficit of individualized care, and that creates real organizational risk. So, taking all of that into account, how do you actually lead like a visionary, starting today? Let's look at some immediate action steps. Now that we understand both the power and the risks of the theory, how do you apply this transformational style right now, today, to your own team? Here are 3 highly actionable steps derived directly from the research to help you establish high psychological safety immediately. Step 1. Host a standard 30-minute learn-it-all retrospective right after a missed goal or a failed experiment. Step 2. Ensure the only output of that meeting is documented, actionable learnings. Absolutely no post-hoc analysis of blame. Step 3. Actively and publicly praise employees who raise their hands and identify operational vulnerabilities early. Doing this instantly shifts your team from a culture of hiding mistakes out of fear to proactively solving challenges together. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Take a hard look at your own team today. Based on everything we've just explored, are you fostering the kind of psychological safety needed for a true learn-it-all culture? Or are you accidentally breeding insight inertia through outdated command and control tactics? What is the very next step you're going to take today to transform your leadership and empower your people? Because honestly, the future of your organization depends entirely on your answer.